right, man, we rolling.
Good. How have things been for you? So let's re-ask the question. Been good?
Things have been a little up and down here, but good for the most part. Just dealing with everything going on in the world, and then work and all that stuff.
Yeah,
this work's been good.
We got this is going to go out probably on election day, so this may be the last episode of the podcast before the country turns into a Mad Max hellscape.
Jeez.
So,
oh my goodness.
But try to look on the bright side.
Yeah, it should be interesting whatever happens. But
yeah.
I mean, we don't have to talk about that.
No fun.
But anyway, so other than that, everything's been okay, I guess.
Good.
Just the weather has been fantastic here in Austin.
Yeah.
We've been enjoying it as much as Oh, really? Doing some more grilling?
Did some burgers and everything today and everything. It was a lot of fun. So I feel like I'm getting better at them, better at doing a good solid backyard burger, to the point where I'm thinking, now I can start dressing them up and let's do some carameled onions or, I haven't done that yet, but I'm thinking, moving that direction.
I wish I could come over right now. And we could eat
all
burgers.
The way, brother. I mean, absolutely. That's one of the big tragedies because it's affecting the podcast, obviously, our schedule and everything like that in a big way. But just even getting to hang out, I would have loved to have had you and Courtney out for burgers or whatever.
Chris and I, haven't seen each other in person since March. Probably it was the last time, when we were both at work. Because I think the last podcast we recorded was the one we did with Thomas, maybe, or do I have that wrong?
No, it's about, or was it the one with Cadena? Did we do one with Thomas after that?
Yeah, it was the one with Cadena. You're right. The one with Thomas, I think, was before that because that was the one where we did the art and commerce for the Patreon. Right. I want to say, yeah. So
yeah, that's right. So I forgot.
Yeah. No, it's pretty crazy. So
it has been crazy times, man. It's depressing because we both have a great love for this thing, but the ability to do it. I mean, we've sort of figured it out, but there's so many other things going on that are kind of secondary to this thing that have just been really slowing us down. But I'm super excited to talk about our subject for the day because this is a lunchtime style episode.
It is.
Although
it is,
neither of us are eating lunch, but who cares? It's the same kind of thing where we have a topic and we're just kind of gonna go over it. And this is a really fun one and a silly one. And you suggested it. So
it's
I don't know,
pretty
do you want to roll
silly.
it up?
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about guilty pleasures and what that
pleasures.
concept means and how it applies to how you consume content and how we consume music and stuff like that, and how it works into our enjoyment of music and our kind of role as music historians or music critics here on this podcast.
Yeah.
That's and I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't do a whole lot of research for this. I kind of want to shoot from the hip on this episode,
cool
just because I feel like I have a lot to say about it. Given my history of being a music lover, music critic, whatever you want to call me. What are your thoughts on guilty pleasures, Chris? I mean, we did a whole episode about how you like the Spice Girls. So
yeah,
I mean, if that tells you anything.
Well, I mean, it's so that the Spice Girls are really instructive when you want to come up with my definition of guilty pleasure, actually. So
yeah, for sure.
So let's start with this. I don't think when it comes to a guilty pleasure song, there's a couple of different schools of thought out there in the world of music criticism. If you're thinking about it strictly from a critic standpoint, you and I have read a lot of music critics, and you have critics who deny the very concept. They're saying, well, there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. There's just a pleasure, and some pleasures are simple pleasures, fine. But if they create pleasure, then guess what? You shouldn't feel guilty about it. And I can sympathize, even though I disagree with that. Because I think they're using a much more stringent idea of guilt here,
Right.
And there is a definition of guilty pleasure that I do disagree with, but I have a lower bar for what a guilty pleasure is. And basically, something like the Spice Girls, for instance. I would consider the Spice Girls more or less, on the average anyway, they're better songs and stuff, as just a pleasure, a simple pleasure. It's not something I'm going to defend in a big way, but if someone came at me and just said, hey, you like the Spice Girls? You should feel guilty about that. I would be like,
right.
No, I like it. It's fine. I will defend it up to a point. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. No. And you kind of made a good case for that when we did that episode. But I have two kind of thoughts based on what you just said. And the first thing is this. I was thinking about this earlier today, and you're someone that knows the kind of the breadth of like 50s and 60s music like much better than I do. I'll be completely honest with you. The 80s, 90s, and 2000s are a little bit more my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Now, from your vantage point, do you think that there were such things as guilty pleasures in like the 50s and the 60s when everything was just kind of new? Like, you know, you had rock and roll, you had Motown, you had girl groups. Like, I mean, you could find value in like most, if not all of that music.
Right.
Like none of it seemed disposable or anything like that, you know? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's two major points to make there. One, a lot of that pop music that we love now would have been considered guilty pleasures back then.
Yeah.
Even something like the Beatles and the early Beatles career for sure. Like if you go back and read contemporary reviews, now there were people like what's his name, Leonard Bernstein, who loved the Beatles, and he kind of came out right away and said, "I love the Beatles.
Said, this is the next big thing.
Exactly.
Like this is it."
So there were visionary people who loved it, but within the context of people who'd just been talking, you know, like if you're a music critic in the 50s and you're talking about bebop all the time and Dizzy Gillespie, you know, you're talking about Ornette Coleman is the coming thing, and then suddenly you're going to go talk about the Hollies, you know, like that looks like a guilty pleasure to you, you know, even if you like it, it's going to seem like a guilty pleasure. So there's that. Time has been kind to all that music, even like the Ronettes or even the pop music of that time has been it's been really kind to, but that's been an adjustment that's happened over time, that things have moved. I don't know which way you want to put it, to the left or right, but you know, moved to the left, and suddenly all this stuff that used to be considered disposable has turned out to have legs. I think the other thing, if you look at the 50s and 60s in particular, one of the big it's like a golden age of the stupid novelty song. And so
totally
really there is a lot of really like I mean, is the Flying Purple People Eater a guilty pleasure? I think you're damn right.
Listen
it
to
is.
that
You know
song
what I mean?
last night, man.
Did you? I heard it. I heard because it was the Halloween last night, and I was at a thing, socially distanced with masks on and everything, but a guy was playing a guitar. I was out in a field. It was safe,
nice.
you know. But but he played the Purple People, and I was just shaking my head, thinking, "Good grief, this song is 50 years old now, and we're still like singing it." You know, like that's a. I think that's a guilty pleasure, and I think there was a whole class of song from not just like Monster Mash kind of stuff, but like, you know, the Chipmunks and stuff like that. That's 50s and 60s. Baked in, that I think probably falls into the guilty pleasure category. But actually, real quick, I will say that there were probably, especially from today's perspective, probably more of that stuff isn't considered a guilty pleasure, though. By you know, like I would not, in any sense of the word, say the Shangri-Las are a guilty pleasure.
Sure,
that's a pleasure. You're like,
exactly.
it's great to listen to music like that. Whereas maybe, you know, if you were in the 60s and you were really into like, even if you weren't a jazz guy, if you were like into muscular rock and roll or whatever stood for it in the 60s, that probably did look more like we would look at, I don't know, a Rihanna song today or something. You know? Like,
right.
Although I think Rihanna is pretty good. That's probably not my best example.
Sure,
but, you know,
she's great.
Charlie XCX, who we get a chance to talk about a little bit, I'm sure. You know,
oh, absolutely. So the other point I wanted to make, or the other thing I wanted to say, I guess, is that back then you didn't really have. Like nowadays, like in the 80s and 90s probably, and maybe even some of the 70s, like you started to see the recording industry becoming this like machine, you know? It became about capitalizing on something and taking advantage of timing and making money above a lot of other things. So I think a lot of the guilty pleasure points that people make, like the dots that they connect, is, well, this is just disposable bullshit pop music that was made for the sole purpose of making some asshole rich. I mean, we've talked about that, you know, in the Art and Commerce episode and other episodes too. So, you know, I think though there is still some artistic value in some of that music, you know. I mean, people like it for a reason. I mean, not everything. I mean, there is a lot of shitty pop music out there, you know, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, you know, it's popular for a reason. So, and I think that's what turned me off, and that's what made me actually say, you know, you should feel guilty for liking fucking some of this music, you know, and you shouldn't for others, that kind of thing. So, I don't think that was really existed in the 50s and 60s. I don't know.
Not quite in the same way.
The same way.
I think maybe the novelty music of that period was more clearly novelty, and so it's a different kind of thing, because it's like, well, can you really feel guilty about liking the Purple People?
Exactly. Like
not
the
really,
reason
because it's not
why,
supposed to be.
It's supposed to be stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be stupid.
Like,
so you just you know. like I was thinking about it when I made my. Well, actually, let me get to my definition of a guilty pleasure because, like I said, I kind of lower the bar a little bit. I want to address something real quick: the concept of guilt, right? So
Yeah.
I do think there are people who, when they think of guilty pleasures, they ratchet this up too much. In other words, is it any? Should you be ashamed for liking any music that you like? And the answer is no. Music is
Right,
just
right.
music. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
this is not serious. You can
Right.
go and like. And I'm about to talk about some songs that are really embarrassing, right? That I made a list
Yeah.
of some of the things that I would
Oh, did you
consider
really?
guilty pleasures.
Nice.
Well, I'll talk to you about it in a second because you saw an early version of it, but because I made a chart, actually, not even a list.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to me, a guilty pleasure is something you define by yourself. It's not something that like the outside world projects on you. To begin with, it's not guilt in the real sense. Some people don't want to ever feel guilt. I feel like there are people out there, music critics, probably pampered upper middle class kids for the most part, fall into this category. They don't want to feel guilty about anything.
Right,
Well,
yeah.
okay. We're not really talking about guilt in the sort of spiritual sense. We're talking about,
Yeah.
is this something that doesn't
Yeah.
meet your own standards? That's all it
Yeah,
is.
right.
Do you like it even though it doesn't meet your own standards for good music? And that's if you do, you still like it despite the fact of not meeting your standards, then that's a guilty pleasure as far as I'm concerned.
Right, right.
Now, do you like it but other people, even though it doesn't meet, like, say, music critic cultural standards? Yeah, to hell with that. That's no one's going to get to decide for me what I like and don't like.
Exactly.
And so if you're defining guilty pleasure that way, I think then it doesn't exist. But if you define it, I think by my definition, it's a more fair definition. All right, you
Right.
like this, you admit that you like it, but it doesn't meet your own standards and you know it. So you can't defend it despite the fact that
Right.
you still like it. It's not a large category, but I think it's a category that has stuff in it for most people. And that's
Sure.
what it is for me. I don't know. What
Okay.
do you think? Do you think that is a good working definition for this?
Yeah, I think
for this
so.
ep?
I think a lot of it comes from the fact that, like you said, you kind of maybe people like us, other people, that actually are big fans of music. They have a certain idea of what counts as music and what counts as mindless drivel bullshit, whatever.
Right,
and like,
right.
if something that falls into the mindless drivel bullshit category actually sounds appealing to them, like that, they and people like us would inflict guilt upon themselves for actually liking that. Like, oh my, there is something about Britney Spears' Baby One More Time that's just fucking fantastic, and I feel guilty for liking it because whatever. But and that's just an example. I don't.
No,
really
that's kind of
necessarily
a
care for
funny
that song, but
example.
yeah.
Because like "Toxic" by Britney Spears, I would put into
Yeah.
the true pleasure standpoint. Like, I think it's a good
absolutely.
song. Now, I don't love
It's-
it, but I like
yeah.
it. I think it's
not a bad
good.
song. I
No,
agree.
it's not bad. I think
And
it's
I
got
wouldn't
that.
have said that 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, probably, but maybe that's the wrong definition of guilty pleasure. You know what I mean? Like, because we also have to contend that a lot of talk about like guilty pleasures is a little sexist. A lot of female-driven pop music for like rock dudes is suddenly off base. I mean, there are people out there who, our age, middle-aged white dudes who would say, "Oh, Beyonce is a guilty pleasure." Well, screw you, dude. Beyonce's not a guilty pleasure. She's fantastic.
Beyonce is far from a guilty
But
pleasure.
what I'm saying
Come
is that
on.
there are people out there who would. Some guy who listens to
Yeah.
his Metallica records and he flips on, Crazy in Love, and he's going to be like, I really shouldn't admit that I like this. Well,
Yeah.
dude, get over it. Like, it doesn't matter if your Metallica loving friends, listen to this or not. Just enjoy it because it's great,
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I guess my point, "Hit Me Baby One More Time," though, for me is in the hate song category. Like, that is not
It's
that's not on the
at
same
all.
level as like
I don't
Toxic.
like it either.
Yeah, it's,
So that vinyl record documentary that we got free
did we
code
talk
to
about that?
watch.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I wanted to bring up about it, I watched it whenever we got the codes for it, but essentially they talk about how that Britney Spears album got released on vinyl for the first time like 3 or 4 years ago, and people were people really wanted to have that Britney Spears album, the record of it, for some reason, and it's not something that got pressed on vinyl when it was released, obviously. Nobody really cared about records enough. Nobody that would have listened to Britney Spears would have cared about buying it on an LP back then. But now all the people that were 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 years old when that album came out, that are now like in their 30s and actually are like getting turntables because it's the hip thing to do, or like, oh my
gotta
god,
go back
like,
and get that
yeah, I would
Baby
really
One More
like to have this. Yeah. And the same goes for all the boy band shit, like that NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, all that stuff is getting pressed on vinyl now, and people are fucking buying it. And to be completely honest, I don't see a ton wrong with it.
I don't see anything wrong. Well, this gets into a big thing about guilty pleasures, because when I was making my list, a lot of the songs on here are songs that I liked when I was a kid, or like a early teenager or something like that I still like, even though I know they're crap. And Britney's all that's. I mean, it's tricky with some of that stuff because some of it was pretty well produced for the time, and there were some what did Britney Spears actually bring to her records? Probably next to nil. You know what I mean? But the people, whoever was behind it, knew what they were doing, and they put together something, that was, I'm going to say passable, because I hate most of that stuff. But there is stuff there that I've heard that I'm like, okay, I can respect that the studio cats who put this together had some talent, And here's the thing, like you can have studio cats like the Funk Brothers or something put together pop music that isn't crap, but this is more that genre was more likely to be crap than anything else. But if they like it, I can't really get onto them, because one of the things on my list, I mean, I've got the rapping section from Red Red Wine. We've talked about that before. There was the Red Wine, you make me feel so fine. I know that's crap. Of course I know that's crap. And yet every time it comes out, I'm like, the line broke, the monkey get choked. I love it. Why? Because I first heard it in 1988 and I was 10 years old, and I hadn't really listened to rap before, and I didn't know the difference between that and Rakim, so I just liked it, And I still kind of like it, even though I know it doesn't meet my standards for being good,
Right. Yeah, no, I totally can understand that. Well, and you also said something, we were talking about like hip hop and the hip hop we listened to growing up, and how you were like, I was listening to Arrested Development, and I didn't realize that A Tribe Called Quest was probably a better version of what that was trying to be. You know what I'm saying? So, but that doesn't mean that Arrested Development doesn't have redeeming qualities, because some of those songs are not bad. So I don't know if that kind of hits on the point you were trying to make. But that, taking a little sidebar, there's Speech from Arrested Development just did an interview on the DJ Vlad YouTube channel, and I watched a little bit of it, and it's kind of interesting.
I'd love to see that, because I did follow them pretty closely for a couple of years, and I do like Speech as a guy. It's just you go back and listen to it, and you're like, oh, well, he's not quite Q-Tip, really, like it's
no, he's not. And like he said that he formed Arrested Development as more of like a collective, and there were like 20 different members at first and stuff, and like he didn't know how he was going to put it out on the road, because it's like, how do you tour with a band with that many people, kind of thing, and but obviously they figured it out. But yeah, I've only watched like maybe 5 or 10 minutes of the interview, but one of the thumbnails for the piece of the interview is apparently he tried to sue the TV show Arrested Development for some reason. I have no idea why or how.
I don't know. Like when the TV show came out, I remember thinking, can they do that? Because I still felt like Arrested Development, it wasn't like that group had just, I don't know when the TV show first came out, but it was probably within 10 years of the last big hit from Arrested. So, it'd be sort of like if I came up with a TV show and called it, I don't know, Kesha or something, and everyone's like, are you allowed to have a show called Kesha? I mean, she hadn't hit in a while, but I mean, I think people still remember her,
Well, Kesha is just a name, though. Like Arrested Development is like a phrase,
Yeah,
I
know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not saying from a legal standpoint that he's right, but it was, to me, it was like, and he has a case about brand confusion at that point. But sometimes people talk about that, like, fair. Oh, how dare he? But it's only because they like the show so much, and they're like, well, the show is obviously a masterpiece, so, but...
Well, anyway, sorry to go on that sidebar there. I just thought it was interesting to bring up. But, because I feel like Arrested Development, the band or the group, has come up more times than I thought it would on this podcast, which is interesting. I don't think I've thought about Arrested Development in years.
Yeah, well, they're a band that just really, they're kind of like the Spin Doctors. Like at the time that's another band that comes up all the time, where it's like there was a time in the early 90s where they looked like they were important, and then time kind of proved that they weren't. And it's kind of like, well, that's kind of a strange thing, especially
that is strange. And that would, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
You got it.
I was going to say that would not only happen with bands, but that would happen with like subgenres of music, like the whole like the swing revolution that came in the 90s, like when like the Cherry Poppin' Daddies and the Squirrel Nut Zippers were like the biggest bands in the world for 3 weeks, and then nobody cared about it anymore.
I'll defend the Squirrel Nut Zippers. I think this is
I will too. I think they were
good.
Fun.
They were the one good band out of that whole thing, because I think they were lifers. Like they weren't like just hey, let's have a trend this week. They were like, no, these are literally weird ass dudes from North Carolina who want to play this. Yeah, and they were also like jokey. karaoke, you know, like, so it was sort of like part Weird Al and part whatever, you know, Django Reinhardt or whatever they were copying, you know. And so they had fun. And I had the first 3 Squirrel Nut Zippers albums and I liked it, but everything else.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'll defend them. Like, and that's an example of something that is not a guilty pleasure to me. I think that's a genuine pleasure.
I don't think it is either. Yeah.
But I think that for some people it'd be a big joke. Like, how are you listening to the Squirrel Nut Zippers, man? You know. But if you go back and listen to the records, I think there's redeeming stuff on them. But everything else from that whole movement, all that was garbage. You know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't have been a movement. It should have been one band that kind of had a weird sound. That I would have been happy with that. You know.
I don't think Brian Setzer is not terrible.
I mean, I wasn't really into that record, to be honest with you. I mean, I love Brian Setzer, but it's like
Stray Cats is far better.
Yeah.
He's got a couple of solo albums he has a solo album called The Knife. I think I've brought this up before. The Knife Feels Like Justice, and it's got kind of like, he's doing all kinds of stuff on that record. He's got some kind of like twangy songs. He's got some rockabilly songs. He's got some more rockin' songs. It's not bad. It's not terrible. But,
I mean, Brian said he's almost like a side thing too, you know, because even though the Brian Setzer Orchestra had a couple of hits, I mean, I kind of feel like Setzer would have been doing that anyway. You know, again, I don't know that he was doing it because it was a trend he was hopping on. Whereas, like the Cherry Poppin' Daddies were a ska band before they were a swing band, you know. So they were just like L.A. dudes trying to score some money, you know. That goes back to what you were saying.
I didn't actually know that they were a ska band before a swing band. That's funny. Like, it was if we kind of just put a different tinge on this and like wear suits and have weird facial hair, then we'll make $1 million, get a record deal.
Yeah, it's exactly. It was just no better than Lou Bega doing Mambo No. 5 or whatever. I mean, it was the same crap, you know. And it was embarrassing. And you know, and as somebody who kind of liked the Squirrel Nut Zippers, it was like, okay, I like this, but I wasn't like suddenly wearing a zoot suit or any of that crap, you know. It was just like, it was one record in my collection, or it was embarrassing to be like, oh, well, I like this, but here's all this other embarrassing crap going on at the same time.
Right.
But that goes back to the guilty part of the guilty pleasure, you know. It's like, well, if I genuinely like it though, like regardless of whether it's a cool thing to like, I don't really feel guilty about it. But I have some stuff on my list that I would say I kind of feel guilty about. Like, let me just one that's been brought up. So here's what I did. Here's the chart that I did.
Yeah.
So I made.
You showed me this. You texted me this chart a while back. If I remember correctly.
Yeah. So and I'll send another tag. Maybe we'll put it up on Instagram or something like that. But I made
cool.
So you got to kind of visualize this, guys. There's an X and Y axis. So go back to your old, 11th grade geometry class or whatever it was. And on the X axis. X is the horizontal axis. I have songs that I like on one end and songs that I don't like on the other end. So it's just like a line where you're putting how much you hate a song or how much you like it. The y-axis going up and down is does it meet my standards or does it not meet my standards? So the 4 quadrants, and it's just for a joke, guys. This is not really serious or anything, but it's just to give you an idea generally of how I think of guilty pleasures. So you have 4 quadrants. The upper left quadrant is going to be songs that I don't like, but that meet my standards. That's the weirdest one. And I call that section, The Guy at Work Made You a Mixtape. So it's going to be stuff where it's like stuff.
That was my favorite part of it.
It's sort of songs around that you might like or that might have some things that you like, but that you just, come on, give me a break. I don't like this. You know? So, and that's probably the one with the least amount of songs, because most of the time if something meets your standards, you like it, but not always. You know? And then the upper right quadrant is your Apple Music library, because it's just going to be all the songs you like that meet your standards. So that's most of the stuff when you think about music you like, and that's by far the fullest category. Now, on the catty corny to that, I guess we say, is your hate songs. It's the songs that don't meet your standards that you don't like. So like I've got My Humps there. You know, I hate that song. Doesn't meet my standards. It's a failure in every way. It lives in that part. And then
it's a failure in every possible way, Marty.
Every possible way. That is a failure. Other than being an enormous financial success and worldwide.
Right. Yeah. Other than it being an actual non-failure.
Somehow, which in a way, for my standards, makes it even a bigger failure because I had to hear it a whole bunch. You know,
right.
But then the other quadrant, the final one, is what we're talking about, the guilty pleasure category. Doesn't meet your standards, but you still kind of like it anyway.
Sure.
So what are some of the things that I've got in here? a funky Cold Medina is just right barely into the doesn't meet my standards, but that I just kind of like, right?
I got the 12-inch single of that song.
You do?
Yeah. It was like $3, you know?
Yeah.
But another song that would fit into that quadrant is Billy Ocean, Get Out of My
Dreams.
Get Out of My Dreams, Get Into My Car.
Yeah, I would put that in
picked
there.
that up for a couple of bucks on 12-inch too.
Yeah,
Just
I think
to
that's
have it,
fair.
you know?
Yeah, you know, like that's a song where it's like, but like both of those songs actually are kind of like potentially toxic masculinity kind of songs.
Oh,
you know
absolutely.
What I mean? You know, like what
Funky
depending on how
Medina
you
is incredibly well, it's fun.
Funky Cold Medina is but it's kind of
Put a little Medina in a drink and the girls will come real quick. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's basically supposed to be like an aphrodisiac. It's not supposed to be like date rape drug. It's just supposed to like, be like, you know, like, I don't know. But still,
and it's not
still,
serious.
Still not great. It's still pretty sleazy. But,
yeah, it's not a serious song, you know. And even at the end, he warns you not to use it, but he warns you for some anti-transgender crap that, you know. So I don't know. I like it because I was a kid and I never took it seriously. But it does. I'm not going to defend it. That's the point, you know. Like it doesn't meet my standards, but I still kind of remember it. So
sure.
We were talking about Charlie XCX. There's that song by Icona Pop. I love it.
I
don't
with care. I love it.
I love it. Yeah. The thing, the one part of it I like is they're like, I crashed my car into a ditch. I don't care, which is pretty punk rock.
I'm completely irresponsible in every way, but fuck it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I like the punk rock aspect of that, but it's so stupid, and I couldn't ever really defend that and say, "Oh, this is a good song" or whatever.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Not even on the level of like a Toxic or a Spice Girls would I defend.
Really?
This. But I like it. I don't think it's on the same level as Toxic.
Okay, all right, that's fair. Toxic
no, I'm not getting on to you, but that's personally I would say.
Well, I was going to say that she has her album Sucker, Charlie XCX has a record called Sucker, and the second song is called Break the Rules, and it has very similar lyrics to I Don't Care.
Yeah.
You know, but we were listening to it last night actually on the way. We went to a Halloween party also, but yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe she makes a whole career of like guilty pleasure songs or something, but
I think that's just her. I mean, you know, she's just, you know, I don't know. But
yeah, kind of does she have just that kind of a Joan Jett F you, I'll do what I want kind of attitude?
I think so, kind of a little bit. Yeah, I don't know a ton about her or her music, to be honest. I just know she's got 3 or 4 songs that I think are really fucking catchy, and I know she sings the hook on that Iggy Azalea song that was like a few years ago that was everywhere. That I'm so fancy. That's her.
Oh yeah, is that her?
Yeah. That's pretty sure.
That's not even
her.
Iggy singing it. Okay.
No, Iggy's rapping, but
yeah.
I don't know. We could have a whole other podcast about Iggy Azalea and like what, I don't know.
What that's all
like for like 2 years the most popular female rapper was like a white sorority girl from Australia.
It's what do you do about that, man?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I guess you just give up on her career, which is what happened after about 2 years.
Yeah, and it was weird because she had a tour booked. She had toured on that record that she came out with once, and she had a tour booked. And she ended up canceling the tour because she like didn't know what to do to record her second album. She was like, my creative energy is just all over the place and I'm not sure what to do. And then like after that, you just never heard from her again. Like, you know, which is weird. But, and like, I'll be completely honest, she can rap. She has talent, you know. Right. I don't really, it's kind of like a Charlie XCX thing. Like some of the stuff she's rapping about is just like, okay, whatever. But yeah, I mean, she's much better than like a mumble rapper, you know. It's definitely not that, but.
It's tough. I mean, that's one of those artists, like I never really, like even that Fancy song, I was like, whatever, you know, I wasn't super into it. But, but I could get, if someone wanted to say, hey, I like that song, you know, like I'm not going to get onto them for it. But I could imagine that falling into a guilty pleasure category or maybe even in the simple pleasure category there. Right. You know, but to me that line is interesting because I guess I think there are some people when I talk about standards on my y-axis, right? Like for some people, standards are all that defines on whether they like a song or not. And honestly, you do you. You know, you don't have to follow my stupid lead on this, but I think that like what's interesting to me is what makes it over the line into my you know, like where I'd say that meets my standards. You know, like what is it about? You know, Say You'll Be There by the Spice Girls that meets my standards. That what do I have on the bottom? What Ace of Base, like I've got in the just barely in the I like it,
Hey, were you telling me you have that Ace of Base record on vinyl?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Really? I think we were listening to that the other day in the car on the Sirius XM channel 90s channel, and I told Courtney, I was like, I think Chris has this album on vinyl.
I bet you. So it was kind of a joke. I mean, when I got it,
and it was like $4 or something like that, right?
It was
really cheap.
super cheap. I saw it at Fry's for cheap, and it was around the time of Steph's birthday, and so I got it to her as kind of a gag gift.
Like
so it's not like we've been spinning it a whole bunch, but
but
it was a record that she liked.
Can't wait to get home and throw on that All That She Wants Is Another Baby, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I would almost put that into the guilty pleasure category because I do think they had some catchy melodies on that.
Sure,
but then I remember that like one of the DJs turned out to be a Nazi or something, and then
That's
I'm like,
right.
oh, never mind. I just kind of hate this. I found that out after I bought it.
But he like reformed and stuff, didn't he?
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of those things where people argue about it. Like if he reformed, is that okay, or did he reform just to get a record deal, or how should we feel about this? And I don't think it's like it's got a comp. It's one of those things where the thinking about it is like the argument is so complex that. Whether it's okay to like Ace of Base or not is not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's like, we're not talking about we David Bowie's Thin White Duke phase here. We're talking about just some BS pop music.
We
that's
can't
not really
spend
that
this
good.
much brain power and energy trying to figure out if we're woke enough to like or not like Ace of Base. This is basically what you're saying.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
That's so
right.
funny, man.
What are some other things I put in here? Okay, so one thing, like I said, a lot of it is like personal, historical. You know what I mean? So there's, I've got what do I have? I've got two songs, two Spanish songs from when I worked in a valve shop. I've got Solamente Tu by Christina Aguilera, but it's a Spanish version of All I Want Is You. I think it's all I want is you.
Wait. When you worked where at a valve shop?
Oh yeah, you don't. Yeah, so
explain to our listeners what that is. I don't think I'm familiar with a valve shop.
So I worked in a shop. I worked in the oil field on industrial valves.
Okay.
So literally those giant valves that you see, like if you're driving past a water facility or something, you see those big valves with the big wheels on them and
pumps,
stuff.
Valves.
Right. So I worked in a shop where we actually repaired those valves, mostly for oil and gas service, but for some water service. And but I was the only native English speaker there. So nobody was like, "Well, Chris, why don't you get to decide what's on the radio today?"
You were like, "I guess no play in this ride." Man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, your radio head is not welcome.
Yeah, they're not going to be like, "Yeah, let's listen to Kid A." It was like they just had the Tejano station on all the time, and they played cumbias and stuff. And so anyway, what was hilarious about this is that I don't know any of this. I mean, it's all in Spanish, and I speak so little real Spanish. It's like I can kind of understand it a little bit. But there was this track that was Solamente Tu, and it would come on, and I was like, God, that's really good. And I was like, I wonder who's doing this. I bet maybe she's from a border town, and she's like, maybe she's like, coming up, the hottest thing in Mexico right now, really brought herself up from nothing. That'd be really great if that. Turns out it was Christina Aguilera's Spanish version of one of her songs, right? And I was like so mad when I found that out, but because it's like, oh no, she was a Mickey Mouse Club kid who's they decided was hot and they made her into a star. Great. Right. Although Christina Aguilera is a great singer and everything.
She's actually got a fantastic voice.
She really does.
I will agree with that. Yeah.
But it's funny that I love the Spanish version of that song. Mm-hmm. The English version leaves me cold. It's just pap, But for some reason, when she's singing it in a language I don't understand that well, I love it.
Yeah. Do you think that's a appropriation on Christina's part?
No, because she's legitimately Spanish. I mean, she can sing in Spanish if she wants to. I mean, it might be slightly exploiting a market, and I think that's up for the people who like it or don't like it to decide that, whether they like it. But, but I don't think it's exploitation. If it was Annette Funicello doing it or something, then maybe it would have been.
Wait, is Christina Aguilera? I guess that is. Is she? Does she have any Is she Hispanic at all?
Oh yeah. She's absolutely.
I did not realize that. My college roommate, he had claimed that he had grown up down the street from her, in Wexford, Pennsylvania, suburb of Pittsburgh, very very ritzy suburb of Pittsburgh, and She did grow up there, so he might not have been BSing on that. I don't know, but apparently this was my sophomore year. Before I knew him, we didn't know each other freshman year, and some of them, we had similar friends, like we ran in similar circles, but somehow we never crossed paths. But Christina Aguilera did the Mulan soundtrack apparently before anybody knew who she was, and apparently back then Rick was like, you guys should see this Mulan movie. My girl Christina's in it. She grew up right down the street from me. She's got an incredible voice. And like nobody knew who she was. And he was, so there's probably some truth to that. So yeah, I don't know. He actually emailed me on Facebook out of the blue a few months ago and said he's moving to Flower Mound pretty soon, which is right outside of Dallas. Yeah. So I haven't talked to him in like 20 years almost.
And he's just like, oh, I'm coming down.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So and he's got like teenage kids and stuff now. It's so crazy, man. But yeah, so who knows? We might hook up. So
that's cool.
We'll see if he remembers that. Yeah, it's pretty
wild.
Yeah,
see if he can meet. Get you to meet.
Let's
Christina.
go hang with Tina, bro.
Yeah, that was to me that not to sidetrack, but I guess in guilty pleasure we can talk about Christina Aguilera for 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Like that was it for me. Like I've made it pretty clear that I hated all of that, and part of what was tough for my age group is it's like. You know, I grew up with Nirvana, and I grew up with Pearl Jam, and the Breeders. It wasn't, it wasn't all just like white boy rock music. You know, there were some angles to it, and I just thought we had defeated dumb pop music forever. You know,
forever, like it was just gone.
I thought it was over. You know, it was like there's the New Kids on the Block, and like Vanilla Ice, and then Nirvana happened, and then none of that existed anymore, and it would never exist ever again, right? Yeah. And that's kind of, and if you look back at it, apart from Boys to Men, which it doesn't really fit neatly into like the boy band, despite their name, it doesn't really fit neatly into that, because they're more like a Motown group. Like there isn't really like any success, at least in the U.S. There isn't really any successful boy bands in the mid '90s until Britney and all of those folks show up in maybe Hanson. And for me, it was just so like hard to understand how this crap came back, because I thought it was like, we have defeated the Hydra. Oh God, all of its heads grew back. It was that kind of thing. And but Christina Aguilera was the one that, when you heard her sing, like, and I like the Spice Girls, sure, but but like Christina was the real deal, and you could tell she could really sing, and you could see her do stuff, and go, oh no, she could be like a Whitney Houston. Why is she wasting time on all this crap? Yeah, and I still kind of feel regret about that. Like she could have been a better artist than she even was. Well, I think she has some stuff that's okay, that's all right.
Yeah, probably now.
Soulmate too, I guess.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting that you say that about, like basically like, well, now Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all this awesome rock music and grunge music is at the top of the charts. Now pop music is just dead forever. So I didn't feel like that. Like I knew that pop music would always exist in some form or fashion, and there wasn't going to be any way you could stop it because of its its accessibility and how it was made and how pop music is designed to make money. I'm like, that's never going to go away. But whenever I got into punk rock and like started listening to like Fugazi and started getting into all the deep like independent music, I felt this real ownership over it, and I felt like I understood something that other people didn't, and that's what turned me off from pop music. Like, well, I'm not going to be just this normal sycophant that just listens to Britney Spears and all this other bullshit. Like, I understand something that you guys don't, and like I've been given the keys to the castle, and therefore like, and it was almost, and I'll admit it, like I almost was like an I'm better than you thing. And even though I don't think so now, like I don't agree with that sentiment now, and like I've turned a corner and I'm not as uppity about it. But but
no,
yeah,
I was the same way. I was the same way when I was into punk in the 90s. Like, I mean, that's part of what I'm talking about here is probably that same thing, except I just felt like because grunge had been so big, and it wasn't just grunge, grunge is just one piece of it, but and I guess I wouldn't go so far as to say I thought we defeated pop music, because clearly, Mariah Carey and Celine Dion and TLC were still on the radio, and I didn't really resent that stuff for existing. Okay, whereas I felt, because it didn't feel like a youth movement, I guess that just felt like pop music, and you either liked it or you didn't, and it's fine, And while I definitely thought I was too smart for music like that back then, like I didn't feel like it was, what was happening in music at the time. I mean, it just felt like that was music for people who didn't care about music. Whereas like Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, like these were the kids who would have been listening to Pearl Jam with me 3 years earlier.
right, exactly.
And, I mean, I remember going back to judge a tournament at our high school, like a speech tournament. And I was talking with some of the kids, and they were like, "Oh yeah," they were going. This girl was like going on and on about Hanson and the Backstreet Boys, and I was like, "Are you in high school?" Like, because nobody when I was in high school would have admitted to liking that garbage, you know. But it had changed, you know, and of course, you know, like I heard someone say once, maybe it was the chick from Elastica who said, you know, music has a default setting. Like if nothing's happening, if there's no cool movement going on, it always goes back to the default setting, and the default setting is pop music. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. Like I like that point, you know. Like, and her point was like in the UK when Britpop kind of exploded and died. Everything went back to like Robbie Williams and stuff like that. And it was just like, oh, there's no, Britpop doesn't exist anymore. Okay, well then it's just like straight boring pop music then. Because if you don't give us something to compete with it, then it will exist. We'll just keep making this because we own the charts and we can make whoever a star. And unfortunately, I feel like it's kind of been that way for a long time.
Right. But and the UK has their own kind of machine, I think, too. That's a lot different than the US. I mean, the Top of the Pops and all that stuff, and like I think the design is a little different. And, NME, and like you know a lot more. Again, you're the expert when it comes to the UK and their how their music scene works a little bit. But
I mean, I'm probably not an expert on how it works now, but I know back then, you know, they could machine people into stardom a lot faster over there, you know.
Really?
But a lot of times they machined good stuff into stardom, so it was okay. But I mean, they could, like I think there's a band called Gomez, and I love Gomez. They're great. But like they were already being called UK's best band. They'd never played a gig or released an album yet. It was just well, how can you be? But you know, the NME had heard the tracks before they came out, and so they knew those tracks were great, and so they were already hyping it. So everyone's like, "Yeah, I love Gomez." Well, you never even heard a track by Gomez. How could you love them? You know. Well, just because
it's funny because that happened with the Strokes too. Like, I brought that up before. Like, they were getting write-ups in Rolling Stone like before they even had a practice and shit. It's like, oh my god, seriously.
Yeah, it's so like the Strokes are.
The Strokes are kind of like a UK band in that, but it wasn't really the music machine that was trying to groom them. They just had the right connections and they knew the right people. And like Julian Casablancas' dad was like the head of a modeling agency or something, and it's like, 5 good-looking white guys with long hair that look kind of edgy. Like, let's let's just turn them into the next big thing. I mean, that's another episode because I definitely am cranky when it comes to Strokes. Although I do kind of like some of the stuff. Love the Strokes. I will be completely honest. Like,
I think
them. They're great. Yeah,
I think they're mediocre.
We'll have to talk about it one of these days.
We'll do it. Well, that'll be a hot takes thing. A hot takes where I'm just saying the Strokes are overrated, you know. Like I think I could absolutely.
It's not all that hot of a take, though, honestly. I mean, but it could be something to explore for sure.
Dude, it was a hot take in 2002 or whatever when I formed it because everybody, it was just like, oh, what do you mean the Strokes? But it was like, come on, guys, like this is not brain surgery. But it's a That's a different take. Yeah, I wouldn't call the Strokes, though, even the songs like even though I'm cranky about it, I would still consider them a real pleasure. You know, they're just not earth shattering, but they're good. You know,
I mean, if you're gonna have lug-headed music, I would much rather have the Strokes than fucking like Nickelback.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not no question there.
You know, so
like, if that was our floor, if the Strokes was just like that's the worst.
Yeah, if the worst band in the world was the Strokes, it would be we'd be all doing pretty well. Yeah, we'd be all right.
Yeah.
Back with what you said about grunge, it's like Eddie Vedder was on the fucking cover of Time magazine and shit. Like those for a few years, like Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder and like Chris Cornell, like those were the pop stars somehow. Yeah. So I can completely understand the train of thought of being like, yeah, this is good, this is over. Like we've taken over, we've infiltrated the machine and we've eaten it out from the inside.
Yeah, it's and good. Kids will never accept the shoveled horseshit in their faces ever again.
Yeah.
Whoops. The thing I didn't understand is that, you know, new kids show up every year, and that's the thing, is it's just like, okay, you know, a kid who is coming up like my age group, you know, if REM and Nirvana and, you know, Pearl Jam and U2 are on the radio and that seems really cool, then that's great. But whoever comes up 4 or 5 years later, I mean, U2 is a great example of a band that like everybody hates now, you know, but like back then, U2, every album was a 5-star album. Like we loved it, and they were huge critical successes and all of this stuff.
here it's interesting you bring up U2 because there was a time, and you might have actually already made this point just a moment ago, but there was a time where liking U2 and being a big fan of that band was like okay, it was fine, and that switch literally flipped to where all of a sudden like Bono's a jackass and fuck you if you like U2, and like there is some U2. I mean, you're a big U2 fan, so I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm a casual U2 fan. But a few of their records I think are just really fucking good, and I've even turned a corner on a couple of them. With your blessing, kind of. You were like, listen to Octung Baby again, asshole.
Yeah.
And then I did, and I was like, oh shit, sonically this is kind of incredible. What the fuck, man?
It's an amazing album, but I think with U2 it was like they're one of those bands that didn't burn out, they faded away, and as they faded away they had massive hits on their way out, and they became a band that was kind of embarrassing to like, and honestly for good reason. Like I think those arguments against U2's 2010 records are fair. Now I think there's good stuff on those records, and I think that's what tends to get glossed over, but I mean I think the moment where they forced their album off on everybody, I think that was the point where like it just became like beyond the pale. But there's annoying things about U2, and there are people who always hated Bono, going way back. But I think that's a complicated thing. Yeah, well, Bono, like Henry Rollins was trashing on Bono. In the late
Henry
80s,
Rollins hates U2.
Yeah,
with a passion.
Yeah,
he has so many anti-U2 hot takes.
Yeah, which are super entertaining because it's Rollins. You know, what I mean?
They are.
Like,
they're great.
I love hearing them, but I mean, I don't agree with him. But that doesn't mean that they're not fair takes. But
so in one of his books, he was. I have a few of his. I actually really like Henry Rollins. I think he's a really interesting dude, and I've read some of his books. And in one of his books, he does a radio show on this like indie radio station out in LA, which I think he still does. But he was talking about how he was like, they cut my airship because they were doing a U2 tribute. Fuck you. You people deserve U2. He said something like that. Like he was just so fucking fed up with it. And I think he was on Howard Stern once, and Howard Stern was like, why do you hate U2 so much? Like, what is the problem, Henry? And he's like, I mean, man, it's just the guys just can't fucking play, man. Like the no creativity. And I'm like, dude, I really
That's
like
not
the Edge's guitar playing. I think he has a really great melodic sensibility to his playing. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you could say that about Adam Clayton and the other guys, but you don't really need rocket science when it comes to drumming and bass playing in that band.
I don't think a guy who played in Black Flag should go around saying, "Oh, you can't play." You know what I mean? Like, and here's the thing: like creativity. Like, come on, man. Like the amount of work that the Edge puts into sculpting sounds out of his guitar,
right?
Like suddenly, I mean, that argument, I'm surprised to hear that from Rollins, honestly, because that argument is like an Eddie Van Halen argument. Like the guys who say that are like the guys who are like, hey man, he can't play 40 triplets a second. Screw that guy, he can't play. Like that. You hear that argument sometimes, but it's like, hey, you come up with something as creative as the sounds you hear on Until the End of the World. Like you do that, and then come back to me, because then you'll be incredible like the Edges,
Right.
I think Adam Clayton's boring, as a bass player, but he holds it down. And that's all he's got to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the low end. That's all you need. And I think Rollins' thing is like, it's just kind of bullshit pap, and why should we have to put up with this? Like I'm the guy that fucking made punk rock accessible for people, and like, that kind of, I think he kind of feels it's kind of like a slight to his whole thing, but I mean, whatever. I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong.
You know what I think it is, honestly? I mean, we'd have to get Henry Rollins in here. Rollins, if you want to come talk about U2.
Yeah, we could talk about music for fucking days, man.
But I think it's probably that they were so clearly calculated in chasing like the mainstream rock audience when they could have done their own thing. So like when you get to like Rattle and Hum era U2, like there's great songs on that, but it is clear if you watch the movie that they are trying to position themselves as the next big important band. And of course it worked. They were the next big important band. But I think a lot of people who didn't like that or whatever were pissed off that they became this enormous group, And I don't know. I mean, maybe it's similar to my dislike of the Strokes, where it's kind of like, well, it's not. I'm not saying your music is bad or good or whatever, but it's like you guys kind of figured out a way to, worm your way into the center of gravity for rock music, and you didn't really bring enough to the table to deserve that. And I'm sure
Right.
that's what
And
Rollins' point is. I would disagree
yeah.
with that point, but I think that's
Yeah.
a fair take, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. It's and I think it's just a gatekeepery thing too, where it's like, I don't know.
Oh, I think they
might
just
be,
became really uncool, and it happens a
yeah,
lot. Like the Rolling
yeah,
Stones used to be uncool. Like when I was a kid, like the Stones. I mean, like
yeah.
the
They are
Beatles weren't cool either.
oldies.
Yeah,
Like
they were
they all
just
got lumped in
oldies.
with oldies. Yeah,
And they
I
weren't
mean,
just
it's
oldies; they were like old guys getting up on
yeah,
stage singing all their
yeah,
old
exactly,
dinosaur
because they
hits.
were all still touring and
It's still
shit,
touring,
too.
and so it's
They're
like,
still
oh,
touring to this day.
yeah. I
It's
mean, now it's kind of like,
crazy.
this is grandpa. Like you kind of appreciate
Yeah.
it, like as old man music or whatever. It's like cool,
Yeah.
they're still doing it. That's kind of you got to admire that. But back then, it was like a 45-year-old guy trying to get sexy with someone a girl your age. You're like, screw
Right.
you pervy
Fuck
old
you,
man.
you-
Like
you-
you're making
yeah,
your boring ass
sleazebag.
music. Get out of here. Go listen to
Yeah.
Steel Wheels somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like that was, and I think
Yeah.
you two just kind of hit that period in their careers too, where it was
Right.
just like, okay, I've got an iPod and I got it full of like a LCD sound system, and then what the hell is this
Yeah.
U2 album? I don't want this.
Yeah.
How
Right.
dare you? Like
Right.
now, I just went
Yeah.
from being ambivalent about this band to hating them.
Right.
you know?
Exactly. Yeah. That's funny, man.
Yeah. But I
Wow,
wouldn't
you
consider
two.
U2 a guilty pleasure.
No,
I mean that's
no.
maybe the example of
I
something
think
that's
I
just not
sometimes
cool.
feel guilty for liking you too, because I feel like a lot of people in my purview, you're not included in this obviously because you're a U2 fan, but a lot of people in my purview kind of like Courtney and even like my sister and like some other people are like, U2, oh my god, like what the fuck, and I'm like, look, man, come on.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean, do
we
they
were
ever
talking-
listen to like War or something?
Probably
Or,
not.
Yeah.
Probably not. I don't know. Maybe not Courtney. She might like a few tunes. I don't know. I'll have to ask her
Yeah.
about it whenever we're done. But I think I was talking to my sister about how you were like the U2 album that they gave to everybody for free on iTunes years ago that like made them like one of the more hated bands.
Yeah. I think it was a
but,
combination of Vertigo being everywhere, and Vertigo's pretty mediocre
Yeah.
song, and
Yeah.
and then that stunt,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't know how it came up, but my sister and I were talking and I was like, well, Chris is a big U2 fan. And he says there's actually a few really good songs on that record. Like he said, a couple of them are pretty dumb and long-headed, but he was like, there's a song called Raised by Wolves that's about like IRA bombings and stuff. My sister was just like, oh, please, give it a fucking rest and whatever.
See, there you go. It's exactly it. Like, so you're not even going to listen to it, but you've decided you don't like it. That's never
Exactly.
acceptable.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, no matter what.
And I will admit that I've done stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, we all have. I mean,
We all have, for sure.
I listened to the Strokes, but I haven't like dug into every album. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, if someone says to me, "Oh no, that you got to listen to that third Strokes record. It's got good stuff on it," I'd be like, "Okay, well, probably I should." You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first two Strokes records are damn near perfect. Like,
Really?
as far as when it comes to, I think they're both, Is This It and Room on Fire are as close to perfect as it gets for like a straight up 3-chord rock band. Like, they're just so fucking good. And like, I don't know. That's just me though.
I think
get
they've
it.
got
Other
good
people-
stuff. Reptilia and
Reptilia, yeah.
Reptilia, is it? I always forget whether it's
Reptilia,
got an
yeah.
I in it or not. Reptilia, and what's the I mean, obviously, what's the big Last Night?
Yeah.
I mean,
She said- Yeah,
Tom
I don't know.
Petty type stuff. Literally, and I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of Tom Petty, I picked up that Wildflowers and All the Rest vinyl reissue, 3 discs.
Yeah, it looked cool.
3 LPs. Oh man, it's so good. I mean, that record's great, but like, it sounds good, and it's fantastic, man. It's a very, very cool.
You were showing that
package
to
and
me. My
everything.
sister
I
was
texted-
huge into that record, and
Yeah.
it's a
great
good
one.
one. Yeah.
The one that he made after that, Echo, is really good too. I don't know if you've heard that album.
I don't know. I haven't heard that one.
It's got a song called Room at the Top. I think that's how it starts out with that song as track 1, and it's just like so killer, man.
It's good.
It's so good.
I have Tom Petty. I have Tom Petty's entire career like dead center of my Apple Music category on this.
Oh,
because
yeah?
it's like it's not complex, but it's a genuine pleasure. So period.
Sure.
Like he's just sort of
Totally.
definition
Hold on.
of good rock and roll. Like
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, look it up in the dictionary. Fucking Tom Petty comes up, man.
yeah. Exactly.
So Echo, 1999 Echo came out. So it was a little bit after Wildflowers.
Yeah.
But I think there was at least a record or two in between the two. But Single wise, I don't know what song was a single from this album. Maybe Echo the title track, but Room at the Top is a great song. So,
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that record. I guess I
good.
kind of.
It's good.
I know I had The Last DJ. Like I heard that, and it was
Yeah.
all right. But before that, I guess I hadn't really heard anything since the Mary Jane's Last Dance days.
Yeah, which was like a greatest hits kind of thing, right? He made
Was
that
that
greatest hits
off of
record.
the greatest
and
hits?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
What's
because
the
that
one?
was,
You Don't Know How It Feels to Be Me. Maybe that was afterwards.
Yeah.
Was it? You don't
That's
know how it
on
feels?
Wildflowers, I think.
Is it? Okay.
I think. Yeah, because I remember
There's
hearing
one
it
of
when I was
those-
spinning the records.
Yeah. Or Let's Get to the
But-
Point or whatever. Is that later?
Yeah, roll
or is-
another joint. Yeah, no, that's yeah.
Is that Wildflowers too, or is that?
Yeah, I think
okay.
so.
All right. I got to go back and listen to the actual LPs. I think with Tom Petty, I'm more of a singles guy. You know.
Yeah, no, and that's I think that's kind of okay. So the Wildflowers was just Tom Petty and the
Yeah. No
Heartbreakers
heartbreakers
were-
on that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, which I didn't even think I realized, but yeah, You Don't Know How It Feels is the second song on
Oh, okay.
Wildflowers.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Anyway,
Those
yeah.
other discs, are they great? Are they?
Well, there's three. So the first two are the actual album,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third one is the like stuff from that session that didn't make it to the album, and it's really good.
Yeah.
Also.
That's
It's
fantastic.
really strong. Yeah, I actually need to listen to that disc again to figure out what my favorite stuff is, but it's all just great. You know, it's all great stuff. And Rick Rubin was behind the boards for that one, so he
Oh, right.
kind of hear a little bit of his influence on it too, which is cool.
That's
So,
fabulous. Yeah, I bet that's really good.
oh, it's
I've been
so-
listening to, as far as like old stuff or whatever, I've been listening to McCartney 2 a lot because
Oh, yeah.
Paul McCartney announced he's going to put out McCartney 3.
Yeah,
So if you know anything
yeah.
about those records, you know, they're basically records that he just made them all himself, and they're usually in periods of transition, although it sounds like 3 is probably just being made as a, you know, hey, I'm stuck at home because of COVID,
Yeah.
you know, kind
Did
of thing.
you listen to Egypt Station? His
I
last
I
record?
listened to it. I didn't really
Was-
get
yeah.
into it like maybe I should have, you know. But I've
Yeah.
heard some good stuff about it. I was actually going on McCartney board and kind of checking out because I really got into
Oh, really?
McCartney too, and I'll talk about that in a second. But more than I've ever gotten into it before. And people were talking about Egypt Station and talking about how great it was, and I was like, man, I need to sit down and listen to that again too, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
'cause,
yeah.
but McCartney 2 is such a strange mutant record, you know. Like, do you know
Yeah.
anything about it?
I know. I haven't really listened to it. Kevin Moss swears by it, though. He
Yeah.
says it's a great album.
It's a cult
McCartney 1
record.
and McCartney 2, right? He
McCartney
thinks
1's
are
great.
really good.
Like most everybody likes
Yeah.
McCartney 1, but McCartney
Yeah.
2 was in its time not a hit critically or
Yeah,
anything.
right.
And it was kind of the beginning of everything Paul McCartney did was attacked, you know, kind of thing. But the
Yeah.
record is like him just screwing around with synths and stuff in his house.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was like an album that was like 20 years ahead of its time because it sounds
Yeah.
like an album someone would make with a MacBook Pro today, you know? But like he was making it with like analog equipment because he was the only
Yeah.
person who could afford to have that set up in
Right.
his bedroom
Yeah.
back then,
That's
you know?
so funny.
So and
It's
not
it's like
everything
the
on it
album,
works. Oh,
you
go
know,
ahead.
James Murphy would have made this album like on
Yeah.
you know, on a MacBook Pro.
100%.
like,
It is.
2012
I
or
mean,
something.
except that there's stuff in it that's tossed off and weird and strange. And, you know,
Yeah.
he's got a song called like Bogey Music, and it's just like a parody of Boogie Woogie music. And it's silly, and it's based on a children's book, and it's
course
dumb.
it is.
Yeah, he's got a
Isn't
song called
that
Temporary Secretary, which is like, and I have that on my guilty pleasures list and it's just this crude song about a guy trying to get a temporary secretary, but it's clear he's really kind of looking for a prostitute, but he's using so it's really
He's using that as like a euphemism.
as a euphemism for
Oh my
and then it's
God.
got this crazy synth
Wow.
line in it. It's like and it's just like it's this weird sequencer thing, and he builds it all around, and he's doing like a country accent on it and stuff. I mean, it's
That's
just
awesome.
really the
Check
most
that out.
bizarre thing, and if you had to take it seriously, you would say this is garbage.
Like, what
But
the fuck is this,
But if
man?
you just
Yeah.
take it as like McCartney being a mad scientist, and you listen to the whole album as just like he's just screwing around with synths, trying to figure out what he thinks of them, and writing
Yeah.
songs to do it. It's actually quite a fascinating record, you know.
Didn't the ideas for Simply Having a Wonderful Christmas Time come out of that
Yeah,
record?
exactly. Same sort of
'cause I was
thing.
talking about how the Christmas episode, the last Christmas episode we did, I was railing about that song and how much I fucking hate it. And you were like, well, Marty.
The context
McCartney
of his
too.
career- yeah.
Yeah, he's working with all these synths and it's actually kind of cool. And I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah, no, but it's weird
enough.
because it is. I mean, the thing is, like McCartney 2 is kind of similar to Wonderful Christmas Time in the sense that, like, probably the majority of people who listen to it won't like it. And so I can't even really defend it in the sense that Temporary Secretary to me is a guilty pleasure, but the rest of that record I think is a true pleasure. But it's a niche pleasure. Like not everyone's going to get it, not everyone's going to like it, and I think so. I couldn't go out like and say, "Hey, everybody, 5-star record, go listen to it now," But I could say, "Hey, you're either in that club or you're not. If you're interested in trying to listen to it and see if you can see what happens when a kind of melodic genius gets a hold of synthesizers and tries to figure something out on it and just kind of makes an experimental record. You might like it. Yeah, it's more listenable than Metal Machine music anyway for that.
There was we brought up McCartney a while back, and we were talking about what is the like the piano that actually has the little this is gonna bug me. It's like kind of like an early version of a synthesizer.
Oh, the Mellotron or
the Mellotron, yeah. And I was doing a bunch of I was going down a Mellotron YouTube rabbit hole one day.
Oh,
and,
awesome!
There's a clip of Paul McCartney playing one live in this like tiny little venue that's like, not very big at all. And he's talking about what the Mellotron is and like how they used it, and then he actually kind of plays a song on it, and it's fucking cool, man.
Yeah,
this is incredible.
I mean, that's the thing about Paul McCartney is that he doesn't get enough credit really because people remember the dumb pop songs that were hits, but he was very experimental and very willing to just try stuff.
And that's the thing too, because it's like, you were in the Beatles, you have all this money, and it's like you just kind of came to the point where you said, I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff against the wall, see what happens. People are using these synthesizers now. I'm going to buy a few and see what they're all about.
Right.
And see what kind of music I can make from it. Like that shit, really creative stuff comes from that kind of train of thought.
Right.
I think,
exactly. And I feel like McCartney too is an example of not everything works, but the attempt is cool.
Yeah.
And that
it's better to try it and fail than to actually not try it at all.
Because the alternative is McCartney just shits out another record that's just the same old stuff, and he just does that for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
You know what? A lot of people did that. A lot of 60s artists just did the same thing forever, and their fan bases were happy with it but what do you ever get out of that? It's just the same old crap,
and it's like
the Stones are a great example.
Yeah, when we had Dolph on and we were talking about Rush and Neil Peart and all that, and I was talking about, I brought up some Foghat and all these goofy Taste of Blue Ash bands, and Dolph made a really good point. Please cut that out, or he'll have my ass.
He'll have your Duff. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, he made a really good point. He's like, a lot of these bands, they tour with 3 other bands because they don't have a whole set's worth of material. They have 12 fucking songs that everybody knows, and they just play those.
Yeah.
It's like, that is kind of sad, I don't know.
Whereas you see McCartney play, and it's like he doesn't play 3/4 of the songs you want him to play because what the hell?
Yeah.
He's
Exactly.
He's got such a catalog that he would be playing a 7-hour show.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he was one of the greatest live performances I've ever seen. Was seeing him the dude.
Oh, I'm sure.
Got up there and performed. And I didn't see him take a drink of water in a 2.5-hour set. And it wasn't taped. He was clearly singing. Yeah. So it was just
supposedly Bob Dylan is like that too. This older woman I worked with years ago at Lux back in Ohio, she was like, Marty, we saw Dylan last night. He was by the end of the show, he had this long suit, big hat on. He was dripping sweat. I didn't see him wipe his face once the whole show.
Yeah.
He was just intensely focused on the audience and on the craft. And the man is 78 years old and he still doesn't fucking wipe his sweat off his face and stuff. It's just that is pretty incredible, man.
That is.
Yeah.
So,
but anyway, kind of got off topic there.
We did, but you know what? I don't think we'll even cut it because it's guilty pleasures,
it.
but it's just a shooting the breeze.
Yeah.
Wrapping back to our original thing before we close this out, anything that you think of, because you haven't thrown out too many songs that you would consider guilty pleasures of your own. Is there anything that kind of came to mind that you were like, here we go, that's a guilty pleasure? Anything in the same category as, what have I got here? The Tootsie Roll.
That's a good question. I'm when it comes to topics like this, I'm not crazy good at pinpointing exactly what my guilty pleasures are, and I probably should know a little better. if anything, I would say a lot of stuff comes from the 90s. You know, I talk about the Sirius XM radio a lot. And since I got my new car and I actually decided to buy a subscription to it, I listen to it a lot, or a lot more than I did before anyway. I'm not doing a ton of driving these days, but when I do drive, I'll throw it on. And usually I'm listening to First Wave or Rock the Bells, the hip hop station. But a lot of times if Courtney's with me, we'll put on that 90s on 9 station. And in some cases, some of the stuff that comes on, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see why people like this, you know, that kind of thing. But
anything in particular that pop out to you? Come on, you got to
I'll
go on
be
the
honest,
record.
like Ace of Base, Don't Turn Around, I think.
That's probably their best
kind of a great song.
Yeah.
You know, it has it. I mean, it's not amazing. Probably like Britney Spears' "Toxic," you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I would say. And what else? Man,
hard to think of something.
it is. I'm sorry. I'm blanking. I shouldn't be doing this. I apologize.
Let me give you a couple off of my list, and they're all over it. But I've got, what have I got?
Oh, the Spice Girls. What's that Spice Girls song? Stop, like the kind of
Stop Right Now.
I need some more of your human touch. That song.
I think it's a good song.
Oh my god.
A little Motown pastiche. It's good.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get to really hear Melanie C sing, and she's got a great voice, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I love that stuff, man.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Genuine pleasure for me, that one. But
Maybe
but
you
I've
could
got
say
did I mention
Pony?
Oh, Pony? No, that beat is too good. Like that.
You're right.
That's too
Timbaland beat is fucking mystifying.
I mean,
I would say though. Well, here's what. So like a lot, like Genuine, like Aaliyah, like I think some people would consider those guilty pleasures, even though that's great music. I don't.
Yeah,
care
I
what
think
anybody
so.
Says.
Yeah.
Like anything that Timbaland did outside of the fucking Chris Cornell record.
Yeah, right.
Is gold. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a genuine pleasure. It's not like high. It's not on the same level as like I've got Abbey Road on here. It's not a Love Supreme, but it's still something that it's totally respectable to have that to rock that out in your iTunes playlist. You know what I mean? Like I think it's fun.
Agreed.
It's not on the same level as Firehouse. Don't treat me bad. Which
Don't treat me bad. No. Guilty pleasure. I would say like Van Halen in some cases can be a little bit of a guilty pleasure, like early Van Halen, like Dive Her Down and that kind of shit. Like I don't know.
It's
Some
tricky.
of it, some of it I don't mind.
Eddie Van Halen died recently, so
He did.
yeah, and we hadn't talked about that. Here's the thing, Van Halen is really tricky, like from a critical standpoint, because they were so like his guitar playing is so influential and so good. But the songs are so juvenile and stupid and driven by the antics of
David Lee Roth.
David Lee Roth and
Diamond Dave, man.
Good old Diamond Dave. And yet when they tried to change that and write more serious stuff, it didn't really work. And what you realize is that somehow the formula that works for Eddie's playing is crazy party music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like the party music guys ended up being right. Like if you hear that guitar playing, the lyrics ought to be "Hot for Teacher," you know, and that's so stupid, but it's kind of it turns out that's true.
It kind of works.
Yeah, like I would rather listen to 1984 than Balance. You know what I mean? Like I would rather listen to the records where they were trying to be fun than the ones where they were trying to be serious.
OU 812 or whatever.
Yeah, that doesn't work as well. You know what I mean? And that was the thing and so part of me has to say that like Eddie Van Halen is a genuine pleasure.
Yeah.
David Lee Roth is a guilty pleasure, and they're in the same band, so it puts that band in a weird kind of middle ground somewhere, and that sucks. But that's just the way it is, you know.
Right.
But I think I threw Firehouse on here because I know that's a story that if you follow the podcast you may know. But like when we did our first or second episode, like I was still trying to figure out whether or not we were going to try to cover stuff that we didn't like, you know, like or whether or stuff that we, you know, is like
how we were going to talk about stuff that we didn't think was good. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Like were we going to talk about hair bands if they were happening at the same time? Do we want to represent them on our playlists or things like that? And of course, I think we made the right decision in the end not to. But at the beginning, I wasn't quite sure. Firehouse is a great example of like something where I think that's absolutely a stupid song. but it's so silly that it kind of comes out the other end for me, where I kind of like it despite itself. The other one from that era is I'm the One Who Wants to Be With You by Mr. Big.
Big.
Yeah, it was my song with my first little girlfriend. So there's there's like a personal connection to it too. But it's like I would never defend that. It's garbage. It's absolutely garbage. But I like it still. So whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of outsider music would fall in guilty pleasure territory, maybe. Some of it I can defend. If you want to call Daniel Johnston outsider music, then I'll defend that all the way.
Speaking of outsider music, we were at a Halloween party last night, and the Shags, they have a Halloween song apparently, and it got played.
Oh
it was
yeah,
on
that's
the playlist.
Maybe Dracula will be here.
It was awesome. I'm like listening to it. I'm like, this sounds like it's probably the Shags, and then I named it. Sure enough, like, fuck man. And I was like, oh, the Shags, and like Patrick, who threw the party, him and his girlfriend, he's got a really interesting taste, and he likes a lot of that weird outsider shit, and I kind of am not surprised that would have been on a playlist that he made.
I just love that you're like, I think that's the Shags, and you had to Shazam it. You're like, yep, it sure is.
Hearing the song and knowing what I know about the Shags from you, I was like, this has got to be the Shags, and sure enough, it was.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why the Shags are so great, because literally it could sound like nobody else.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
There are a lot of terrible garage bands.
Them.
Yeah, there's a lot of every country, every city in the United States has a terrible garage band in it, but none of them sound like the Shags. They have some indelible thing that is completely unique to them, and in fact, their second album, when they tried to get it together, they practiced a lot more, and they started to sound like just a bad garage band, and it's not as much fun, because the first record, they're just completely doing God knows what, So.
Yeah.
But I would. That's one I would defend, But I would defend it as like you've got to listen to it as a raw art brute kind of thing. You don't listen to it the way you're listening to the Rolling Stones or something,
Right. Well, explain that kind of like how do you listen to something like the Shags differently than you would listen to like the Stones or something more accessible? Because I don't think I've ever thought like how I process that differently in my head. You know what I'm saying?
I think partly you've got to listen to it a little bit more actively. Like you don't throw the Shags, although this guy threw it on at a party, so good on you, dude. But like it's not like you put on the Shags and then just go sweep the floor or something. Like it's not music for. Like we talked about Noi, and how Noi was so great because it was like music for doing something. Like throw it on and go jog or get out there and go boating or do something. Like, and this music just has this propulsion. But the Shags, what's fascinating about is listening to. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this band, it's three sisters. They were teenagers whose parents, whose dad went to a fortune teller or something, or I think maybe the mother was doing tarot card readings or something. But it's
a really goofy story.
It's a really crazy story, but it's an example of insanity, basically driving music. And anyway, the fortune teller told him he would meet a redhead that he would marry, that he would have daughters, and the daughters would grow up to be in a famous band. And the first two things happened, and so the dad was like, "Oh, I got to listen to the fortune teller. I must force these girls to be in a band.
I must buy them all instruments and make sure they be in a rock band."
But at the same time, he was completely like overprotective. I mean, these were like girls who were.
I didn't know that.
And it's sort of a tragic story, really, because he didn't give them any kind of freedom, and he made them play guitar all the time, and they didn't want to.
Really? That sucks.
So that part of the story is really sad. But what you hear when you listen to that record is like these three girls who don't know much about music, who are kind of being forced to figure it out, and they sort of make up. Like there'll be weird time signatures for like two bars, and then it switches around or whatever, and it's almost I mean, I hate to say this, but it's almost like admiring a cave painting, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, but it's like they were literally had so few reference points for what they were doing that they just had to be inventive. And of course, if you just listen to it, it just sounds like some atonal crap, Like if you're trying to listen to it the same way you would listen to freaking, a Drake record, you're going to be like, "What is this?"
You're not going to be into it.
But if you listen to it and you're going like, "Oh, these are some innocent girls who are trying to make music to please their overbearing father, and this is what they came up with." It's super compelling, and all of the atonal, weird, out of rhythm drum fills and all that kind of stuff is like the result of their naivety And but
Right.
then if you talk to any musician, you know, all of us go through a phase where we have a bad garage band. And like I said, those garage bands all sound the same. Like they all sound bad in the same ways. You've got awful tone and you're playing like crap and you know what all this, and your songs aren't very good. The Shags avoid that. They're like bad in unique ways, and that uniqueness is super compelling if you've been through that experience
Right.
before. And I think musicians like Zappa love that record. Like
Zappa
Kurt
said that the Shags were like his favorite band or something, right?
Yeah, I think he says something like that.
Best American band ever or some shit.
Better than the Beatles. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
sure some of that is just tongue in cheek, but I mean, I do
Right.
think he genuinely recognized that quality, you know, that naivety in their music, and found that really compelling, like I do. You know?
Right,
So
right.
I named a fish after the Wiggins sisters. You know what I mean? So
Nice.
it's like,
Nice.
but you know, in the end, it's a tragic story. But one thing I love is that like they actually played gigs and all this, and they really tried to do it. And the crazy thing is that in the end, the fortune teller was right. They did end up playing in a famous band. You know, it wasn't famous for the reason that he thought they were going to be famous.
Right,
but,
right, yeah.
You know, their albums
Ironically
reissued.
famous, I guess.
It's weird, yeah. I mean, because I don't listen to them ironically. Like, I genuinely like them. You know, it's
Yeah,
not just like, oh,
right.
listen to this trash and laugh at it.
Yeah,
You know, like,
yeah.
and people get accused. Shags fans get accused of that all the time because.
Yeah.
But I
like,
think
you just like this because it's dumb. It's like, no, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way they're trying to figure it out, the way they're solving the musical problems they're being kind of faced with, is genuinely interesting.
Yeah. And they didn't really have influences. They didn't really
That's
know
it.
like what to base anything off of, and that's why
Right.
they sound so original. You know.
Yeah,
Like,
precisely. I mean, and
which is
even like that
crazy, yeah.
Halloween song, you know, it's like the topics of their songs were almost childlike. They've got
Yeah,
a song like My
yeah.
Pal Foot Foot. My pal, I have a friend. His name is Foot 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 Foot. You know, and it's just
Yeah, right.
there's like call and response harmonies that make no
Yeah,
sense and everything.
right.
And it's like again, they're solving the musical problems in a way that's unique to them, which
Right.
You know, and it's
Right.
also, it should be said, they're women or girls,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they sing from a feminine perspective at a time where rock bands that didn't happen. And so I also
Yeah.
think that there's something that's really great because like they'll sing a song. Well, because I don't know, there's a unique, I'm not even gonna say feminine quality. It's really a girlish quality to the music
Yeah.
that you
Right.
don't really get until much later. You know,
Like, when would you say you actually get something like the Shags as far as their feminine presence goes? Like
I mean, I'm thinking like
Sleater
something like
Kinney or something like
Cat
that,
Power or something. You know, like
Cat
something
Power,
that's a
okay,
little bit
okay.
more, maybe Kristen Hirsch, maybe. Like there's it would have to be something that has maybe a naive quality mixed in with it, like the Moldy Peaches or something.
Kristen Hirsch. I don't know if I know who that is.
From the so that's interesting. She's a real
Yeah.
interesting character. She was in how am I blanking on the name of the band? So Belly, Tanya's
okay.
band before Belly. What was the God? They're incredible. Throwing Muses.
Okay.
Just took me a second. Yeah, so she was in Throwing Muses. With,
Okay.
yeah, so I got to go back to our Breeders episode to talk about that again.
It's interesting you bring up the Moldy Peaches because when we started talking about the Shags, I was kind of wasn't Kimya Dawson, wasn't she in the Moldy
That's right.
Peaches? Yeah, Kimya Dawson kind of reminds me of like that kind of stuff. So it's interesting you bring that up.
It has
So,
that same sort of naive quality and
Yeah.
and also sort of girlishness in a way, you know. That
yeah, totally.
You know.
I dated a girl who loved Kimya Dawson, and I didn't know who she was. And she played me one of her records, and there was a song where it was like her singing, like playing an acoustic guitar and singing, and she had like 5 or 10 kids that were like singing along with her.
Yeah.
And it was so kind of amazing and weird and like,
Yeah.
you know, and kind of like what you would get when you listen to the Shags. I kind of felt the same way, you know.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a similar thing, and I think, you know, to go back to our guilty pleasure stuff, like I think there's stuff like that not everybody gets that I don't feel guilty about liking. You know,
Right.
like I think it's okay, and I think even if it's naive or strange or, you know, it doesn't meet your standards in a sense, if you still love it, then love it. You know.
Yeah,
and I
totally.
And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. You know. It
Right.
just, to me, like the Shags or a lot of outsider music meets a different set of standards for me. It's that human quality that I look for in music. We've said this multiple times on the podcast, that what I love about great art is it makes me feel more human.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want. And I think outsider music especially when it's created in such a sort of honest and innocent way, will always do that for me.
Right.
Well, if it's like the Shacks, if it's like Wesley Willis, it may not.
That's a good thing to bring up. Like if something is created and with that kind of thought process behind it, is it always going to be interesting? You know what I'm saying? Like
probably.
Yeah.
So, that's a whole other podcast. We'll do an outsider music one. We've threatened to do that before. The hardest thing about that is, our audience is not going to have any point of reference for that kind of stuff because it's so obscure. But
it's so weird. Yeah. Talk about Kit Ream for an hour
and a half.
Oh my God!
Yeah, Kit Ream. Here comes.
He
man.
murdered a man. I'm sorry. God. I can't help myself every time that
comes up. Yeah.
We just looked at each other like, oh my
what?
God, are you fucking serious? I'm referring to the time where Chris and I were at the record fair and we talked up one of the record dealers about Kit Ream, and he said he looked both of us dead in the eye and said, "Do you know he murdered a man?"
Yeah. It's like, really?
Like, whatever.
Okay.
Dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had to indulge him because it's like, what do you do in that situation? It's like, yeah, tell us about it.
I mean, the thing is, he's such an obscure guy. It's like, well, maybe he did. I don't know, but like, don't go saying that if you don't know the facts. Then
it's like, one of those things that's like his fucking drunk uncle told him like 10 years ago, and he takes it as canon,
I think it's one of those things you just imply it from the record. This guy sounds crazy. Probably killed the guy.
Probably, Well, I heard it from my drunk uncle and listening to "Don't Go Roly Poly on My Soul." Yeah, I can see how that's plausible.
Yeah, sure. He probably
somebody.
Did.
Yeah, like whatever. But I don't know.
But where do you get to the point where you're like, oh, here's a rumor to where you're like telling people not to buy his record or whatever?
Yeah. Oh my God. Anyway, well, Chris, this was a lot of fun.
Always.
I had a really good time doing this podcast, doing this episode rather. Anything else you want to say about Guilty Pleasures?
No, I don't really have anything else to say about it. I wonder what you guys think. If you've got some Guilty Pleasure songs, hit us up with it. Wherever.
We will not judge you at all, even though it sounds like we might.
We're not super judgmental. I will say this about us: we're not super judgmental when it comes to music. And not anymore. Maybe we were when we were younger, but I think we've both pretty well grown out of it. You know what I mean? Like, we don't like the same stuff as everybody. If someone wants to come and tell me that, they think My Humps is a great song, I'm not going to agree with you.
Yeah.
But, it's whatever.
But we're not going to like you any less because you think it's a good song.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Life's too
Chris
short
was
to judge
saying,
people.
a lot of our coworkers are like, how can you hate My Humps? It's like, we don't hate them because they take on, a different opinion than us or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we trashed that 2008. That was really funny. I was like, this is the worst one we've seen yet. And then those guys were all like, how could you say that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. It is what it is. But Courtney, the same thing. But anyway, sorry.
She loves all those 2008.
She loves My Humps. Yeah. She started singing it. Oh God, of course, Chris. I mean, I don't know. I think if you are 5 to 10 years younger than us, that song was popular when you were like, I don't know, in your teens maybe. And I think that, you couldn't escape it. And when you're that age and you can't escape a song, you just kind of give into it, I think, at some point.
I guess so. It was the, Freak Me Baby of the mid-2000s or whatever.
Me, baby. Freak me, baby. Oh, my God, that fucking song.
Yeah.
Sometimes they play that on Sunday Night Slow Jams, which is a radio show that we listen to sometimes. We haven't done it in a while, but it's syndicated. It's syndicated, and it's every Sunday night from like 8 to 10 or 8 to 11, and it's hosted by this guy named R-Dub, who has this really deep voice and talks like this, and he's awesome. And people can call in, and they have like an "I'm sorry" line, and or it's like, you can call in and give a shout out to your special someone or whatever, and it's great. And like somebody will call in and they'll be like, "Hey R-Dub, this is Brian from El Paso, and I got something to say to my girl Sherry," and he'll be like, "What do you want to say to Sherry?" And he'll be like, "I just want to tell you, girl, that I've been thinking about you." And he's like, "All right, well, that's great. I'm going to play." He's like, "Can you play Boys to Men on Bended Knee for her?" And he's like, "Absolutely, I can do that. I can dig it. We're going to play Boys to Men on Bended Knee for my boy, whatever." And Sherry. And it's just like, it's so great because it's kind of like, It's kind of like
That's like listening to the radio when you were a
it's kind of
preteen or
like a
something.
product of a bygone era. And this
Yeah.
guy, R Dub, apparently he started Sunday Night Slow Jams when he was like a kid, when he was like 17 or something. And he just kept building it up and making it bigger to the point where now it's syndicated all over the fucking world, man.
Way
It's
to
great.
go, dude. I've got a great idea. Monday night slow jams. Come on, dude. It's not the same thing. It's a
Not
different
the
night.
same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's
but,
the
you
nuts.
know.
It's just you and me because you do a pretty good. All right, man, I can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Chris, what do you want to tell What do you want to say to Stephanie tonight?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that like
yeah,
it would be hilarious. Like
dedication to
you talk
Steph.
like that, and then I'm just myself. It'd be just
Yeah.
like the most like, like killing the vibe kind of thing. You know, where you're just like, all right, we got a new caller. I'd be, what? You don't want to listen to that?
Oh, man, that's so funny.
Right after I said we don't judge people, but whatever. You know?
Well, great, man. Well, awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun doing this episode, and hopefully we can get back. We've tried to get back on a bit of a normal schedule, but as Chris alluded to earlier, life kind of gets in the way sometimes, and we've kind of had to take care of things that are more important than the podcast, unfortunately. But we're hoping to get back on track and hoping to start releasing episodes a little more regularly. And, we are going to do a New Year episode pretty soon. We're starting planning for that. So be on the lookout for that. And we hope you guys are having an okay time in the world. We know it's crazy, and we appreciate you listening to us and giving some of your time to us. And we hope that you all are safe and that your families are safe and healthy. And we will do it again soon. Chris, you have anything else to say?
All I got to say is thanks for sticking with us, guys, and you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, guys. Thanks.